Hello and welcome to Stand Up. I have a great show for you today. It is day, 3 or 4 of my staycation. I'm getting a whole bunch done around the house. Finally getting the shed landscaping done. Almost ready to show it to you after 2 years. Very excited about that. I also do have 2 great interviews, 2 great guests on today's show, which I think you're really going to like. No news segment. I will get back to the full show on Monday, but trying to take a little bit of time off to catch up on my spring yard work, which I plan and train all winter for, believe it or not. But joining me today, I've got the Chief Operations Officer and Counsel at Planned Parenthood Great Plains, because they cover Oklahoma. You may or may not know that last week Oklahoma, in effect, banned abortion. Also covering Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri, Planned Parenthood Great Plains. She is a really smart person who I loved talking to. Emily Wales joins me for the first time today. Also, I've got a real-life economics professor from the University of Southern California, where he is, like I said, a professor of economics. He's got a new book, Going Remote, How the Flexible Work Economy Can Improve Our Lives and Our Cities. So I'll talk to women's reproductive rights and the future of work on today's episode of Stand Up, and I can't do it without your help. So, if you're not already a subscriber, please sign up now. Go to standupwithpete.com. Thank you so much for your support, for supporting my time off this week. And now it's time to get to Emily Wales of Planned Parenthood to talk about all of what's happening in Oklahoma and beyond. I think you're really going to like this. All right. I've got Emily Wales now, and I'm really happy and really appreciate you joining me. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
So how long have you been working in this organization? I want to just give some context because I think it matters in terms of what you've seen.
Yeah, sure. So I've been with Planned Parenthood for about 5 years. Not quite. It's a lifetime in Planned Parenthood years.
Yeah.
I started as the general counsel. So our 4-state region didn't have an in-house attorney before. And for somewhat obvious reasons, I think we got to the point where that was not workable. We had so much litigation, so many issues with state regulations that they decided to bring on an attorney full-time.
So I hosted the Southeast Planned Parenthood Gala years ago. Okay. And I remember I made a joke. I was doing comedy, believe it or not, at Planned Parenthood. Hard to write. But
I think we're hilarious. I don't understand that.
You guys are. You have to be in that. But the joke was basically like Planned Parenthood Southeast in the states that it covers is like you guys are like the elite here because there's a difference in the Northeast, obviously, with laws, much less attitudes. You are in the same situation, given the states that Planned Parenthood Great Plains covers. It's a much different organization and operation, Planned Parenthood, in the states that you cover versus, say, the Northeast with a whole separate laws. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. The way our operations works, I think the way that our communities sort of embrace us or fear sort of public connection to Planned Parenthood is absolutely different. The work is the same. The services are largely the same. The patients we see are often the same. But it does feel, I think, a world apart from some of our sister affiliates in other parts of the country.
And I'm, the reason I bring it up is because I have a question about morale. You already kind of hinted it's, 5 years, it's a lifetime, because every day you have to be concerned for your personal safety, I imagine. And every day there's going to be protesters, I imagine. And every day you're being attacked in your email box and everywhere else. And so the question is, given the law that's just been signed in Oklahoma, how is the morale of the people in your organization, and why does that matter?
It's definitely a dark time for us generally. And we're pretty used to dealing with fights. We're pretty resilient. We have things come up all the time where contractors back out when they are criticized for working on a Planned Parenthood project here. We've had folks who don't want to deliver our mail on occasion because they have objections to the work. So we're kind of used to that stuff. But right now, I think feels like the first time when we can't internally pivot and adjust and change our operations to make it work, because that's what we've done for a long time is we've taken on these new restrictions. All of us have a level of, I think, fight and protection for our patients. And so that just comes with the territory. But in this moment, it feels a little bit like the tidal wave has finally gotten to the point that it is just washing over us and, more importantly, the patients we serve. feel like they're getting lost in everything that's happening.
I wish there were some project. Maybe I'll pitch this to you offline, some kind of morale support. You know, those of us who live in states that are far more supportive of women's reproductive rights, you know, maybe we can send some kind of campaign of cards and good energy and pizza to everybody working in the facilities and at Planned Parenthood in all the states that you work with. But for another conversation, let me ask you more specifically, you know, just generally, I should say, what is this law that was just passed in Oklahoma, which is one of the 4 states that you work in? What does it mean?
Last week, the governor signed Senate Bill 612, which is a near total ban, meaning that the only exception is in a medical emergency. So none of the other exceptions we often see in these laws. It does not have the Texas-style vigilante enforcement provision, so it's more of a traditional ban. Now we have different types of abortion bans in the United States. This is a traditional one. It doesn't take effect until August. The problem for us is it's not the only one. So this is now on the books. We will challenge it in court, but we have a handful of other bans that do include emergency clause provisions, so there's no waiting period, and also the Texas-style vigilante enforcement, which we think will be heard next week.
A lot of questions based on that, of course. You're in a legal fight, obviously, and we can spend a lot of time talking about that. But I want to know how you're dealing with it on the ground in all of the states in Planned Parenthood Great Plains in terms of your patients and their interest. What happens? Because the point, obviously, that just always needs to be made is this is not ending abortion. Abortions will continue. They will be more dangerous. They will be harder to get, and people will continue to struggle with, but they will still happen. So what is happening on the ground for your patients?
Most of the time, what we're having are reassurance conversations. We see a spike in patient calls when any sort of new restriction takes effect. Some of it are really coming from people who are seeking access. They're trying to schedule appointments. Can I still come to Oklahoma? The answer is yes. But some of it's also just folks who are curious generally what's happening in the state. Is what I read in the newspaper actually true? So we're trying to reassure patients you can still get care, but it does mean for us, you know, having this constant fear, this day-by-day provision of care means that we're trying to figure out the best ways to navigate people out of Oklahoma as well. We've been on the receiving end of Texans for 7 months. So we know what it looks like to show up desperate, to show up and say, I didn't tell my family or friends where I went, not because they wouldn't be supportive, but because I wasn't sure if they could get arrested for helping me. So now we're just going to be doing those same tactics, but to get people out of our state.
What is the most common kind of question you're hearing? I mean, you might have just covered it, but.
A lot of it's logistics. How long will I have to be there? Can I miss just one day of work or will it be 2? Can my kids come with me? Do other people have to know? What trouble will they get into if they find out? Those we're hearing all the time. But now there's this undercurrent of questions that is also related to why is the law different? Why are my rights different now than they would have been a year ago? Why are they different in Oklahoma potentially than Arkansas or
right.
Kansas? And you know, we're a healthcare provider. We generally don't do those conversations, but we're trying to be there for patients because they're not talking to other folks about them.
Yeah, you mentioned you're a healthcare provider. So, you know, kind of what percentage of the healthcare was abortions and what percentage was general women's healthcare, reproductive healthcare, et cetera? Because I think a lot of people think you might have to shut down, but that's only as a result of what they think that you do. So what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. The vast majority of the services we provide across our 4 states is non-abortion care. It is contraception, STI testing and treatment, cancer screenings. We still continue those services even when we lose access to abortion, as we may do in Oklahoma soon. But we have seen a real uptick in abortion need, and it has been because of Texas. So when Texas lost care after 6 weeks in September, folks flocked out of state. I mean, they were coming over state lines trying to get access to care. And Oklahoma, for many of them, is the first point of access. So we've done some rearranging internally to try to create more availability, to have more staff physicians who are available. But at the end of the day, our core services are not abortion, but we want to provide comprehensive care to everyone, and that includes abortion care.
A lot of what you guys do is also educate people. You answer the questions about their healthcare needs. And I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on, other future bans, and obviously what they're trying to do to public education in terms of if you don't teach sex ed or general health care, reproductive parts, et cetera, stuff, you can describe it however you want. What are your concerns, Emily, about how public education, specifically healthcare, is being attacked at state houses across the country?
Yeah, we're already there in our 4 states. We have restrictions on Planned Parenthood going into public schools to talk to students, to provide information. And we are seeing the result of that now. We get patients who come in and are not sure exactly how they get pregnant or how they got pregnant. We have patients who are understandably confused by our legislators talking about what they think contraception is and what they think abortion is. And many times they're not informed. And so they are trying to ban or make more restrictive contraception methods that have nothing to do with abortion care. So we see this in our patients already who simply do not have a public health education system that's providing services. So we're working to identify other ways to provide that. A lot of times it's through community partners or through parents who reach out and say, I'm not that comfortable having this conversation with my kid or a group of neighborhood kids, but you all are the experts, so will you do it for me? And the answer is yes, we'd love to, because it will make your kids, I think, healthier and safer, but then also avoid the issues we see 10 or 15 years down the line where patients don't understand how their bodies work.
It sounds like there's a faction of Americans and politicians and interests that are making it harder to learn about sex education, as well as, if you did know about sex education, harder to get contraception or learn how to use it, because it's not just condoms, obviously. There's several different forms for women. And then, so they're doing that on one end. And then if you do get pregnant because you didn't know sex ed or healthcare, which is important to not realize that some people don't. And then you're making it harder to get abortion, or rather contraception. I'm not making this point very articulately, but then they make it harder to get an abortion, Emily. It's on both sides of pregnancy. What is the game? What is the strategy? How is that?
I mean, controlling people's lives and bodies, shame, fear, I think those are all wrapped up in what we see. And at the end of the day, for most of the politicians passing these laws, it's really not about healthcare. It's often not really about, even Planned Parenthood. It's having someone to blame. It's having someone to run against and promote your campaign and build up your next political strategy. And so they love having, I think, an enemy. And we have been that in our states for a long time. So the attacks do come in the form of the services we offer, in the form of education, and it is creating a public health crisis.
What is the public health crisis?
That people not only can they not access care, not only are we getting kicked out of Medicaid and restrictions on our access to Title X, the federal family planning funding, but then you also have people who, when they do need abortion care, they can't get it. They don't understand it. It doesn't surprise us to see, I think, the spectrum of problems, starting with young people in education, starting with lack of access to care, and then ending with people who need comprehensive abortion services and are going to have to leave their state to get it.
You just put succinctly what I muddled through for like 7 minutes earlier. Thank you for that.
Sure. I mean, I do this full time, so I think you have to know everybody's topics. That's much more expert.
Oh, yeah, right. I just have to ask the experts the questions, and it shouldn't be so hard. But this is such a tough issue, and I think it is important for people to understand exactly the type of work you're doing. A little bit again about the socioeconomics. I mean, in some places, Planned Parenthood is the only healthcare provider. I mean, and people get really so stuck on this abortion issue, and not healthcare in general. For women especially, help us understand why that part of your work is so important to so many, and at times exclusively. Absolutely.
We provide care for lots of people, for many, many patients, overwhelmingly women, people who can get pregnant, but not all the time. We have male services too. And often what we do best at Planned Parenthood is we know sexual and reproductive care. So we're experts and people trust us. We're good and people believe in the confidentiality of the services we offer. And then we're accessible. So we go out of our way to reserve same and next day appointments for patients, so that if you are a low resource or you don't have great insurance, we're available to you. And sometimes that means, we're not a competitor to the health department or other public sources. they have plenty of need they're seeing. We try to supplement that and offer an alternative option so that people can get in right away. When you have often contraception, but especially for STI testing and treatment issues, you want to be seen fast. And that's what we try to do.
Right. I didn't even mention that. I always am wondering how changes in medical technology and procedures are affecting specifically abortion. So they make these laws that make it illegal to for a doctor to perform an abortion, to terminate a pregnancy. But now you have pills. You have other medication that you can take to terminate your pregnancy. I feel like I remember reading a story about how when it was still illegal to get an abortion in Ireland, I almost think I'm making this up, they were flying in the Plan B pill or the pills with drones. And it was like a loophole that provided women a lane to terminate their pregnancy. And so why is that not a solution, or is it?
People are, to some extent, accessing abortion pills online. There are plenty of issues with that. I think for many, many people, getting abortion care through the mail, if you can get it, generally from an international source, can be done safely in your own home. You can self-manage an abortion. But that's not true for every patient. There are some contraindications where you should be able to talk to a medical provider about whether you're a good candidate. And the medication abortion pill is really only effective up to a certain point in pregnancy. And lots of patients don't know that. So even if they get access to care online and they come into one of our centers or another healthcare provider later and say, am I still pregnant? The answer may be yes. And now you're farther along and you're going to have to leave your state to get care. Or no, but there are other indications that you probably didn't need to be someone who took medication abortion. At the end of the day, it is good that people have resources because we know they need them and people will try to terminate their pregnancies. But not being able to do it with the guidance and support of a medical establishment is pretty horrifying. But it's a huge difference to what we're seeing. People are talking a lot now about, will we return to a pre-Roe era?
Right.
For some people, that will be true. It will mean leaving in the night, getting in your car, driving hundreds of hours. For other people, medication abortion will be an option, but our states are doing everything they can to make that not a reality. I mean, it is illegal in our 4 states to do medication abortion by mail. Our physicians have to actually watch to make sure that patients take the pill in the health centers. That's how restrictive this is, even though there's no part of, FDA protocols really that would require that.
Right. They often make laws on medical issues without any advice or input from doctors and physicians or scientists. It's completely legal. And that's why I want to ask you, because you're a lawyer, question about the law and what you see, if anything, changing. Should I have a conversation? Should my question for you be about Oklahoma state legislature and that law, or should we just settle on talking about the Supreme Court? What's the strategy?
That's a great question. The Supreme Court has been disappointing is an understatement. They've had the Texas case a number of times now, and lawyers who saw the failure to intervene in August, I think, looked at each other and said, this is horrifying. There's no doubt a 6-week ban violates Roe. There's no doubt people's constitutional rights are being violated. Why would they not intervene? And I do think the court looked at each other and said, gosh, this, sue each other provision is so novel. We have to think about it. So they had the case again later in the year, after we had been serving over 1,000 patients just at our health centers, primarily in Oklahoma, seeking care, who were clearly having their rights violated in Texas. There's no doubt you have a right to an abortion at that stage of your pregnancy. You couldn't get one in Texas as a result. And the court didn't do anything. So I don't know what to do beyond say the court has been unpredictable in the extreme. We're very seriously worried about whether Roe will remain the law of the land in June. And so we are looking at options at the state court level.
What's it like to be a physician who provides abortions or does abortions in Oklahoma right now?
I think it's incredibly hard. And our physicians are used to the pushback from protesters, the criticism, but having conversations with patients where you say, we're going to walk through your options, we're going to try to get you scheduled, but there's a very real possibility that by the time you come in for care, we will not be able to offer it. That's a horrible conversation. Yeah. And so we're trying to prepare people on the front end to say, we're going to keep care open as long as possible. But if we can't provide care, you need to start thinking now about what it will mean to get to Kansas or what it will mean to get to Colorado. And for some folks, 3, 4, 5 hours is going to be the minimum amount of time to get care. And that's on top of these Texans who have come 5 or 6 or 7 hours already.
Are you seeing, or do you think we will see activists and organizations providing an underground railroad, if you will? Or, I mean, I say underground because they're making laws against leaving, right? Like you might have to escape your state. Yeah. If I understand that right. Sometimes I think I'm reading these laws wrong because I think, well, this couldn't be that medieval and archaic, but they are. So what are you seeing in terms of opportunities being created by activists, nonprofits, Planned Parenthood that are above or even underground to provide access, a way out of these states and into a state where they can get the proper health care?
Yeah, people will create methods of seeking abortion care. There's no doubt. We have a particular role because we are a healthcare provider where what we need to do and what we have been doing is working on what we call patient navigation. So we created a whole new team of staff members that now focus entirely on assisting patients with the logistics to get out of their states. Oh. So they help go through what the state restrictions look like in neighboring states. They set up hotels, they figure out gas cards, they talk about whether you're bringing kids, so we have an idea what to expect when you get to us. So we'll continue doing that. But even in states where we lose access, Planned Parenthood and other providers has a role on the ground, which is to both receive patients and say, yes, you're pregnant. Here's any medical contraindications. Here's what you need to know about getting care. And then being there when they come back after receiving an abortion out of state to say, we want to do your follow-up. We want to be able to talk to you. Because part of what we're seeing is patients who say, I'm never going to talk to anyone about this again. When I get home to Texas, this will have to be a secret that I carry. Because I don't want anyone to know. I will put them at risk if I tell them. So I think you do have to be, in some way, part of the network to say you can talk to us about the care you received and what your needs are.
I never, as much as I've thought about this, read about it, and talked about it, this is why the discussion with someone like you is so important. I never thought about the whole, I have to keep it a secret.
Yeah, absolutely.
For legal reasons, much less, it's always been an issue, unfortunately, for women to be shamed for it. And increasingly that's changing, which is awesome. But now it's a legal issue to be concerned with. Good God. Well, let's end on an anecdote from you about either a patient or a person whose lives you've seen changed. And also, let me just say, to give you time to think of that, also a thank you to you and everybody who works in the organization and in the facilities, from the executives to the physicians, to the people who work at the desk, even to the custodial staff, who anybody that's walking into these buildings is being targeted, is being doxxed, is being exposed, is being threatened. And we just all, maybe they should all be a tour of duty. Everybody does a year or two in Oklahoma, in Kansas, Arkansas, Texas, etc. So thank you for all the courageous and important work you do each and every day. And if you wouldn't mind ending on something about, the success that you have every day there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I have the benefit of being a lawyer, so I provide counsel. I get to have really tough conversations with our team, but the folks who receive patients every single day and who are doing the emotional support for people who are scrambling is pretty incredible. I'll say that.
Yeah.
So as far as patient stories, most of them are at this point wrapped up in pretty traumatic situations, but we do have plenty of patients who say, I was considering my alternatives, and my alternatives were trying to get out of the country, potentially going to Mexico, throwing myself down the stairs, or doing something horrendous, or getting this appointment. And I got the appointment, and I'm here today, and I want to say thank you. So we do have we always have patients who I think are appreciative, but in this moment when people are literally refreshing the pages of abortion providers in neighboring states for Texas to see when they can get in, could they be lucky enough to get one of these appointments that are so hard to get, it feels really rewarding, I think, when you have that one-on-one conversation with the patient to say, we're glad we're here. And even if it feels unsafe out there, we'll keep providing care. So there are very, very good moments because we know that we are changing people's lives and offering care you literally can't get elsewhere.
Such a weird thing to hear described as your list of options. And by that, I mean, as a man, like as you were thinking, I was like, I would never have a health situation, something in my body where I would have to make a difficult decision based on a law that's been enforced like this. Like, I mean, it's just exclusive to people with reproductive organs. Those are who the laws are for. And the rest of us don't have to ever even consider it as a possibility where, we can't get pregnant. It's just enough things to worry about, but that's not one of them.
No, most of our patients aren't, you're not even thinking that much. And it's also really disheartening that I think for some of our patients, it's not that much of a surprise, right? The fact that their reproductive choices are controlled by people outside of themselves is not that new. It's just reached a new level of intensity, I think. And,
Emily, I can't thank you enough for joining me and for the work that you do every day. And I hope listeners will support your organization because of all the regions of the country that Planned Parenthood is in, which I think is everywhere. It's got to be one of the toughest places to be. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, there she goes, Emily Wales of Planned Parenthood in Great Plains. Such important work that they do out there. I was really happy to have her joining me, and you can follow them on Twitter. Let them know that you heard them here on the show and support them at PP Great Plains, Planned Parenthood Great Plains, PP Great Plains. And now, time to get to my second guest on today's show. That's right. I don't half-ass it. Even though I'm taking some time off, I'm still posting each and every day and either having guest hosts or doing 2 guests a day. At least that's the aim. And I got Matthew Kahn, who is a professor of economics at the University of Southern California. He has written a very interesting new book. It's called Going Remote, How the Flexible Work Economy Can Improve Our Lives and Our Cities. He's actually written, I think, like 9 books. He's an urban economist. He's written a lot about climate change and climate adaptation, and he's a really fascinating dude, a real-life nerd, and I so enjoyed talking to Professor Matthew Kahn for the first time about this very important issue. Lots still remains to be seen about the future of work, but I will talk to anybody who does this kind of research and writes this type of book. Again, the book is called Going Remote, Professor Matthew Kahn. He's on Twitter at MattCahn1966. He's a senior fellow and director of the Health Markets Initiative at the Schaefer Center, Provost Professor of Economics at the University of Southern California, and he is my guest on Stand Up right now.
Okay. I just get tickled with the idea that I would tell my high school teachers or even my college professor, I think I had one, that I am interviewing an economist. It's very exciting to have you here, Professor Kahn. Thank you very much for joining me, and congratulations on your very important and fascinating new book.
Hey, thank you.
Going Remote, How the Flexible Work Economy Can Improve Our Lives and Our Cities. Were you working on and writing this book before the pandemic struck? Was this an idea you were thinking about?
So, Pete, when the pandemic struck in 2020, I was on the Johns Hopkins faculty, and my life was flipped, my parents' lives, my son's life, and it got me thinking about the silver lining. I'm an optimist, and I'm always looking for silver linings. And I started to think about what is the silver lining of the crisis we're in, and started to think ahead a few years of what our cities and our life could be like or will be like when work from home persists.
And being an optimist, just the real bird's eye view on the book, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty. How much good do you think has been done through our adaptation to this horror?
So the horror has been horrible. What I'll never know is if we hadn't had this work from home, this Zoom and this information technology, where would our economy be in terms of productivity? So, Pete, I have to confess that my book, it's not science fiction, but it's set a few years from now when COVID's in our rear view mirror. And I hope that's not wishful thinking. And so in a thumbnail of what we gained was that we've been commuting less. We've been reconnected. For those privileged among us who could work from home, we've been commuting less. We've had more time with family and seeing children. And we've been connected to our community and old friends in ways as we have been commuting less and been in the office less.
Yeah, those are all benefits in my mind. I suppose some people, for whatever reason, they like their commute. They like the office. They like even some people being away from their family. But generally speaking, I think what you're saying is right in terms of what people have learned and adapted to. Your book is really interesting for so many reasons, but you break it into 3 different sections: workers, firms, locations. There's a great introduction. There's a great conclusion. I think that this is the most interesting and important phenomenon that is happening right now. So I'm happy to talk with you about it. Going remote is what is happening. Let's start just though with the idea that this isn't the same for everybody. I think one point you make over and over is to talk about how the main difference, of course, is generational in many ways. It depends where you're at, because when you're a young person, you want to schmooze, you want to network, you might even meet someone that you might have a romantic relationship with.
So my 20-year-old son is eager to go to Wall Street and to find out if he's a good match with the firm he'll be interviewing at. He wants to be face-to-face. Pete, my parents in their early 80s in New York City have been spending more time together. They're not retired and they're working from home. My mother doesn't have to get on public transit with her bad hip. And so there've been gains for her. For a middle-aged guy like me giving my lectures by Zoom, I'm not in my pajamas. I am wearing pants right now. But the young need face-to-face interaction to learn what they're good at and to be mentored. For established, privileged people who can work from home, of just new freedoms for middle-aged and older workers, including people in their 60s and 70s. So, yeah, that's a great illustration of how it impacts people generationally differently. I mean, I can't take that commute anymore. This book hits so close to home for my life because I left corporate media, or it left me in Midtown Manhattan. And you were telling me earlier, you grew up in Westchester, and so you know the area. And so now I no longer have that 1 hour commute, which made my entire body mushy and made me sad and depressed even to have to do. And it was dangerous as well. And that has changed so much. So talk a little bit about like the research on people's commutes in terms of what it does to us and why many of us, including me, don't miss it. So the typical American is only commuting 20 minutes one way, but that masks huge variety. Pete, in America's expensive cities like New York and San Francisco, we had these monster commuters. I once calculated that my father spent 2 years of his life on Metro North taking the train from Westchester to New York City. He didn't like that calculation. And going forward, if people are only going to work 2 days a week, or if some people are just going in a few days a month, people could move out to a Poughkeepsie, move out hundreds of miles away from center cities, if that's their conception of the good life. So, Pete, an idea in my book is the conception of the good life. And you mentioned our diversity, that some people are like Jerry Seinfeld and want to be in New York City. And now they could work for a suburban firm and be in New York City if that's their thing. A key point in my book is because commuting is so costly, we were tethered, we were tied down by where we live, by where we work. But in a work from home economy, we become untethered. Van Halen had that song Unchained. Maybe you don't remember it, but that song by I hear David Lee Roth's voice in my head when I talk about this nerdy concept of decoupling where we live from where we work. Yeah. It's different for everybody, and you make that point over and over again. But tell me though one more thing about the commute in terms of, especially depending on how you do it. Some people drive, they're alone. Sometimes they carpool, I suppose, whoever those sociopaths are. No, I wish I could do that, or I wish I could have done that, because it certainly saves money and the environment, which you've written so much about. So tell me one more thing about the commute before we move into what's changed with what you call superstar cities, and some of that, well, aren't. One more thing about the commute. So, Pete, let's do a commute on a snowy day. I was born in Chicago, and when I was a student in Chicago, there were some nasty days. And so people get stuck in traffic, of traffic congestion that's unpredictable, given that we don't have toll roads. And so in our future economy of avoiding the stress of going to work on Chicago's worst snow days, on days when you have a child who has a play or a sporting event, the ability to skip the commute on those days. If your spouse is sick, the ability on that day to work from home. And so what I'd have your listeners think about is, on average, the ability to miss out on commuting 3 days a week, but also in the most annoying days of the year to have this get out of jail free card, to not have to be chained down by the office on those days. I think it is very valuable. And we're going to learn how much workers value that by the choices they make and maybe we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah. We got to talk about workers and what they gained. And, I guess we could talk about what they lost. But your book talks about short run gains for workers. And then you look ahead. And I love this because it's really important. And it'll be really interesting to see what your and other predictions, how accurate they are. But talk to me about the short run gains for workers.
So for the short run gains, it's that we continue to live where we've lived, but for work from home eligible workers, that we're going to work fewer days a week. And so, Pete, I talk about stronger residential communities. Robert Putnam, this prominent Harvard political scientist, talked about bowling alone and that America has a social capital gap. If we're not going to work as much, we have more time at home and more time in our residential community. So, Pete, even I have friends in my residential community, but I don't see these folks that much with constant commuting. And so when we liberate some of that commute time, do we sleep more? Do we do chores more? Do we spend more time with our children? Do we spend more time in church? Of just all the possibilities of when you're given this windfall of time, how do you use it?
Yeah.
Of parental care, just thousands of margins of living a better life.
It's so true. My church is my garden. And so if I look at the weather and if I have even 30 minutes, much less an hour or more, I get out there, even if it's bad weather. And that's where I worship. That's where I'm at peace. And it's the idea that I have the flexibility to do that is, I believe, what now should be defined as wealth, because I lost so much with the commute and the having to be in the building in the 37th floor. What are medium term gains for workers? Name, you've written so much, but pick whatever you want.
So I want to talk about two margins. I lived for a couple of years so medium term gains. When workers work for a firm that permits and encourages work from home, workers can choose to move to a new area. So I mentioned, if you love the arts, if you're a bit of a hippie, of moving out from Westchester out to Poughkeepsie, New York. And so, Pete, an idea, people have their own hobbies, ski bums, those who love to surf, those who are new age and want to be in Sedona, Arizona, of all these possibilities of living your good life with the scarce time we have on this planet, to live where you want to live, not where you need to live because of the commute. And so, Pete, that's this untethered notion again. So in the medium term, this ability to plan out. If you work for Amazon HQ2 and they're based in Virginia, could you live anywhere in a 300-mile radius around there and set up your life for your spouse and children and your parents there while doing your job?
Yeah, it's, again, a completely different way of life and choice. I mean, our parents and even us, we didn't have this choice. Our kids absolutely will, which I think is such a game changer. Let's look at it from the point of view, though, of the firm itself. You always think about how much money they would save if they didn't have to provide you with all the benefits that they might in terms of the commutes and saving on taxes and parking and tolls and all that, much less all of the support that they need for the space, just the property itself. If I don't need as big of an office, then my rent is lower, my overhead is lower. I've always thought, why not be able to track the productivity of someone at home from the firm, and I'll save more money? I mean, isn't that a no-brainer? Why do you need this huge office, Matthew?
So this is a great question, and it will differ company by company. A point that urban economists have made is we're more creative and we gain more trust with face-to-face interaction. So, Pete, we've been talking face-to-face, but would we be having an even better discussion if we were literally face-to-face? And so a fight in urban economics, a debate in urban economics is, are we more creative and productive? And is there more serendipity when we're face-to-face? And if that's the case, then there continues to be a case for the office, like that TV sitcom. If with people you don't fully know, there may be more reason for face-to-face, and it may help with mentoring. But for people who have established a relationship together, surely we can Zoom together and talk to each other. I loved what you said about the cost advantage for firms in terms of needing less real estate and reducing their costs and having a wider labor pool to choose from if they allow for remote work. If you only hire workers who live within a 5-mile radius of your firm, you're really limiting your talent pool. And that's a little crazy in the modern economy.
Well, that brings up another really important point that you delve into, which is if I can work this job from anywhere, then so can anybody else. So now I'm in competition, not only with people in my area, in my city, in my country, but I'm in competition with somebody in India or China or Brazil or any other place on the globe that can work the hours maybe that I can't, and for less money and so on. Like, what's going to happen to America's middle class or upper middle class if now I'm in competition with somebody in Canada, God forbid?
So, Pete, this is a key point that economists have given the awkward word offshoring.
Yeah.
And I have two thoughts here. We will face more intense competition, but if employers ask for some face-to-face, people who live in the United States will still have an edge if you have to go to the mothership twice a month for face-to-face, if it's not fully remote, like being a radiologist. A second point is America will need to raise our skills as we compete in this international labor market. And this will actually create an imperative to improve our public schools and education. And so competition, there's a question of how you respond to competition. So the NBA playoffs are going on right now. So do you practice more, or do you just say, I'm going to lose this competition? And so I agree with your point. We're going to face more competition, but I do think that face-to-face interaction will continue to be a key part of business, and that American workers will have an edge there. I don't think we're going completely remote.
What do economists say about the future of cities? You talk about Paul Krugman's predictions that they're going to kind of return to the way they were before the pandemic, some cities, but I'm not sure that you agree with that. And also, there's all different kinds of cities. I think you mentioned Baltimore. I can think of all the places I grew up, upstate, from Buffalo to Albany to Syracuse, and the rest of the country. You talk about superstar cities. So what do you think is going to happen?
So let's start with Buffalo. Buffalo has been launching a marketing campaign to welcome remote workers to live there. And they're saying we have excellent infrastructure and we are an affordable, high quality of life city. Yes, it's a little bit cold, but that might attract people who love winter hobbies. And so Buffalo is leaning in to attracting work from home workers to move there as a family friendly, affordable place. Where you can, of course, fly from a good airport to have meet and greets with workers. Pete, let's contrast that with San Francisco. The superstar cities, San Francisco, New York City, Boston, superstars were doing great in those cities before COVID. But the middle class and upper middle class were confronted with really high home prices and really long commutes. And on net, for many people, that wasn't working for them. But you had to move to these cities if you were going to be in tech. And so, Pete, that brings me to a point about Baltimore. I lived in Baltimore for 2 years. Baltimore is a majority African-American city, and African-Americans are underrepresented in tech. In the year 2019, before COVID, you had to be in Boston, Silicon Valley, Seattle to work for tech companies. And unfortunately, African-Americans tend not to want to live in those cities. I argue in my book that with the rise of remote work, cities like Baltimore, with affordable housing and with great culture, one can live in Baltimore and work for a tech company remotely, and that this creates new exciting possibilities such that certain groups like African Americans who've been underrepresented in tech, because of the rise of work from home, have new opportunities. And so this simultaneously disproportionately helps this group, and it helps cities like Baltimore, Cleveland, Detroit that haven't been able to attract tech companies to have a brighter future for residents who live there. Yeah,
really very important. And I mean, Baltimore, arguably better weather than Buffalo, but the incentives that communities and cities have to now create to attract people. You mentioned Buffalo is a really interesting thing as well, paying people to move to these places. But if you can live anywhere, where are we all going to live? Aren't we all going to go to the same parts of the country? Doesn't that raise real estate costs? I mean, the cost of living, you mentioned these cities, San Francisco and New York, especially, like you call them superstars. I might refer to them as rich assholes, but I'm a much less kind and generous person. But I mean, we've done pretty well, and it's always been really, expensive, even to live just near New York City, and you got to commute to get in. So is there going to be more equitable societies in terms of middle-sized cities? Do you think that certain places, certain parts of the country, including you've written a lot of obviously about climate and the environment, are going to, you predict, expand? Where should I buy real estate? Where should I think about living in the future?
So in my book, I celebrate American diversity I don't think we have a ranking that everyone says that San Francisco is better than Buffalo. Of course, we like warm winters. But Pete, I lean in the book, and I've been wrong before, as my mother has pointed out. Mm-hmm. I lean into the book that different Americans differ in what is our conception of the good life. Who wants to be in Minnesota? Who wants to be in Alabama? The challenge that some places like a Boise, Idaho, or a Buffalo, New York faced is that there weren't jobs in such places. There were jobs, but there wasn't the biotech clusters and tech clusters that have formed in America's coastal cities. I have this optimistic belief that by decoupling where you live from where you work, people can vote with their feet. And Buffalo has affordable housing. And for families looking to raise children in a safe urban environment, this might be very satisfying to people. And so my book isn't elitist, declaring what are America's greatest cities. These cities will actually compete. The Buffalo Bills have an improving football team. Right. For those who celebrate professional sports, there's opportunities there. And so what work from home does is a city. You used to have to move to a city with jobs. Now you can seek out areas where you're happy and use the internet to commute to your job.
This book is really interesting and important, but so is all of your work. And I wanted to tie this up by asking you to kind of talk to me about how it all connects. Specifically, I wonder what your thoughts are on the labor movement and the unionizing of Amazon and how that ties in with working remotely and making a living wage. I mean, do workers stand to gain? What are your thoughts on what's happening in the labor movement?
So a key issue, we know that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have had a great couple of decades. Yeah. And economists are really wrestling with how to boost everyone else's incomes. I have wrestled with this issue of unionization I understand and celebrate the importance of American workers feeling that the system is fair and feeling that the American dream holds. So, Pete, my definition of the American dream is a time machine. When I teach undergraduates, I talk about the time machine. Pete, I was born in 1966. My son was born in the year 2000. Would he prefer to be born in the year 2000 or prefer to be born in the year 1966? Would he pay to get into a time machine and live his life during my time? And so, without being too academic, my test of the time machine is if people continue to want to live in the future, if that makes any sense, that you don't want to live with FDR and with Lyndon Baines Johnson as your president. To answer your question, in my work on adapting to climate change, I argue that cities are competing against each other as we face drought, sea level rise, higher temperatures. Which cities will have an edge in adapting to these threats will attract people. In a similar sense, those areas that maintain great quality of life will attract remote workers. Pete, it's my hope that the income of middle-class people in America the real income, you talked about less stress, your enjoyment of gardening, of that more and more Americans who can qualify to work from home, that their real psychic wages will be higher, even if their nominal wages are slightly declining, if they're living in better cities where they want to be. To answer your question about unionization, what puzzles me about Amazon and other firms that are unionizing is, will these companies substitute to robots? I read Kurt Vonnegut's book, Player Piano, where he wrote this book like 70 years ago of what will people do all day long? Will robots replace us? And so, Pete, a question in academic, nerdy economics is, what do we do better than robots? And I find it ugly if the unionization growth leads to increased demand for robots. How ugly is that?
Listen, it's isn't that what you guys are all debating, like, constantly? And there is this school of thought that it's just exponentially, what is the law where it keeps increasing over and over? It's just Moore's law just spiking. And so there's no possible way that there's going to be enough jobs for people. And then there's the more classical economist argument about machines. That's what they said about the horse and buggy and so on and so forth. So you fall where?
So I fall in the following camp. I talk in my book about that if work from home workers are more footloose and can move anywhere, this actually creates an imperative for city school districts like Baltimore to improve, to offer better education and better services. Pete, I'm a fan of competition. And when people aren't pinned to an area due to commuting, areas that want to compete for people and the tax base have to raise their game by providing better services.
Right.
And one of those services is schooling and street safety. And so an optimistic hypothesis in my book is those cities that prove to improve their educational system will be rewarded with more work from home workers locating there. So I claim in the book, without evidence, that work from home is going to create this competition between cities. Before COVID, too many of us sought to be in New York City and San Francisco when we didn't really want to be there, but that's where the action was. Our real wages, our psychic wages rise when we can live where we want to.
Yeah. What is the future of education? Will students continue to go traditionally into the brick and mortar school, or will they be in their homes again, cheating off their friends' papers and looking it up all on their desk?
So I've had friends who have homeschooled their children. I watch Kahn Academy videos myself to see how Mr. Kahn teaches. Yeah. He's a dangerous man, but he's such a great teacher. And so, Pete, I think we're going to see more experimentation with education of children with special needs, children with special talents. Our school system can't be one size fits all for our highly diverse economy. And I think we're going to mix and match there. And Pete, an idea. If I'm a father of a young kid and I can work from home on some days, I can actually work with my child to help him or her on education. Sure. So all sorts of issues. In the past, we went to work and our children went to school. There's all sorts of new permutations of mixing and matching of how we educate our children and getting parents more involved in the education of their children when they're actually seeing it if some children are partially working from home themselves as students.
Although I'm not sure I want some of the parents more involved in the kids' education, but that is another conversation for another time. Boy, what a fascinating thinker you are. I've really enjoyed getting to know your work and, of course, this new book, and I wish you the best of luck. I hope that we can talk again, Professor Kahn, because you know, this is not going anywhere, this subject, and we're going to have to compete. You agree it's a bit of a debate, future predictions, right?
It absolutely is. I talk in the middle of the book that firms are debating how to integrate this work into their work plan. For example, for firms, so you have a broader talent pool to hire from.
Sure.
I talk about that firms are going to have to experiment here with different strategies to see if their productivity of their workers increases, if workers quit, if the best workers quit less often when they have access to this. Or do they feel that they're not getting to know their boss and not being mentored? So there's all this learning that needs to take place so that we can make the most of this new opportunity. And so I call it an experience good. A silver lining of COVID is we ran this experiment and we learned how much we gained from it.
Yeah. I like what you write about and talk about that, and everybody should ask themselves what if any, experience good they've achieved, discovered through this or any part of their life. It's really interesting. Thank you so much for joining me, Professor Kahn. I really appreciate it, and it's an honor to be in your classroom, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
All right, that's it. Professor Matthew Kahn and Emily Wales of Planned Parenthood. I hope you enjoyed these conversations and learned as much from them as I did. Thank you very much for listening, for telling your friends, for giving a review on Spotify or iTunes. If you haven't done that, please set aside some time to do that today. Set an alarm. Go ahead and set aside some time to write a review. Support the show with a paid subscription. As always, standupwithpete.com. And you can always email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. John Carroll taking us out, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Be the change you want to see in the world, folks.
I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Stand.